Today, we're talking about the Kalam Cosmological Argument. The question that I want to consider is it reasonable to believe that God exists? And the Kalam Cosmological Argument is fairly simple, it just has two premises. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, and therefore the universe has a cause. Okay, so let's take a look together at the major premise here, which is whatever begins to exist has a cause. And let me try to explain a little bit the reasoning that is behind this premise. One reason to think this is true is that any proof of this principle would be less obvious than the principle itself. That is to say, the idea that whatever begins to exist has a cause is so evident to all experience that in a way it's hard to give it even more evident principle that would show the truth of this principle. It's confirmed by our experiences in our everyday life, and it's used in our scientific explanations of the world. So if there's a big forest fire, for example, we don't say, oh, it just happened, nothing caused that. We search for a cause. Was it caused by a lightning strike? Was it caused by someone smoking? Was it caused by someone not tending a campfire properly, right? We don't just say, oh, it just happened. When we find a dead body, we don't say, oh, it just happened. We say, well, what caused the death? And that's what an autopsy does, right? It seeks the cause of someone's death. Were they murdered? Was it a heart attack? Was it cancer? What caused this person to go from one state, being alive, to some other state, being dead? So all known evidence confirms that whatever begins to exist has a cause. And there's no evidence at all that some things begin to exist with no cause. God is eternal. That is to say that God always existed. Now, the question is, does that contradict this principle here? Well, this principle here, as you see, is not that everything begins to exist, but rather that whatever begins to exist has a cause. So that's a very different claim than saying that everything has a cause. So if God is eternal, then God would be something that would not begin to exist. To be eternal, what that means is you don't have a beginning and also you don't have an end. So if there's such a thing as an eternal being, then that being would not begin to exist. So then the question is, well, why couldn't the whole universe be eternal? Maybe that's true, that the whole universe is eternal. And that's exactly what the second premise of the Kalam cosmological argument is about. The second premise is the universe began to exist. Now, maybe that premise is wrong. Many people thought, Aristotle, for example, thought that the universe was eternal, always existed. So is that minor premise true? Now, Craig's view, there's good reason to believe the minor premise too. So he appeals to a lot of scientific confirmation for this premise that the universe, and by universe, what I mean is all time, all space, and all matter, began to exist. In other words, that the universe is not eternal. So everything in the universe is expanding outward from a single mathematical point. We know also that at one point in the past, about 13.7 billion years ago, all the known universe was contracted down to a single mathematical point. And a mathematical point, as you guys know from your geometry, is really nothing. The expansion out from this point is sometimes called the Big Bang. And the universe began to exist, according to the contemporary scientific evidence, about 13.7 billion years ago. Now, if that is true, well, then the universe did begin to exist. In other words, 20 billion years ago, or 50 billion years ago, or 100 billion years ago, there was no space, there was no matter, there was no time. Now, in addition to, you might say, the scientific evidence pointing to the beginning of the universe, there's actually also philosophical arguments that suggest that there can be no actual infinity through finite addition. Let me explain what I mean by that term. So you can distinguish between actual infinity and potential infinity. If you, for instance, begin counting, and you count 1, 2, 3, 4, and you keep counting, you're heading towards infinity. And that would be potential infinity. By contrast, what an actual infinity is not just heading towards infinity, but there's an actually existing number of things, an actual existing infinite. And there's an argument that Craig puts forward that there can't be an infinity, an actual infinity, through finite addition. The series of events in time is a collection formed by adding one member after another. In other words, how do we get the past? Well, what the past is you have today, you have the present, right? And then when today's over, it's added to the days that have gone by, right? So you have a finite amount of time, this 24 hours. When this 24 hours is over, well, then that 24 hours is considered the past. So time is a collection of current moments that end, right? One after the other. So, but no collection formed by adding one member after another is actually infinite. Imagine you're at the beach and you start digging sand at the beach. And so you have one little shovelful of sand and you put it in your pail, another shovelful, put it in your pail. And you keep on going, you keep on going. Well, when would you get to the point where you say, well, now I have an actual infinity of grains of sand in my pail? Well, you would never get there, right? You could never have an actual infinity of grains of sand in your pail because you've created that collection through a finite addition, just one little shovelful after another little shovelful after another little shovelful. So you never really get to, aha, now I'm at infinity. So if that's right, then there's can be no series of events in time that is actually infinite. But if there's no series of events in time that's actually infinite, that means that the universe can't be infinitely old. It has to, in other words, have a beginning in time. Another way to think about it is that addition cannot create an actual infinity. So no matter how much time you had, an actual infinity is impossible to create through finite addition. So think again of counting, right? I start counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And no matter how much time I had, I would never get to and infinity. Got it, to an actual infinity. And even if I counted by 2, 4, 6, 8, or 10, 20, 30, 40, again, there'd never be a moment where I say, aha, now I got to actual infinity. So imagine you're Superman, right? And you take off from planet Earth and you're heading to a planet that's infinitely far away, infinite number of miles away. Well, when would you get there? Well, the answer is if it's really infinitely far away, you'd never get there. Even if you're traveling 100 miles an hour, 200 miles an hour, 1,000 miles an hour, you'd never reach a point infinitely far away. So the idea is if you have a finite addition of grains of sand or a finite addition of miles per hour flown, you never reach actual infinity. The best you could do is potential infinity. So no matter how many numbers are counted, right? If you're counting, for example, you can always add one more, right? No matter how high you get, a trillion, a billion, a gazillion, you can always add one more to what you have. So if you can't count up to infinity, neither could you count down from infinity. In other words, you couldn't go, if there's an infinite number of years, it's impossible to reach an actual infinity of causes through finite addition. Just like you couldn't if you have a finite shovel, you can't ever create an infinite pile of sand through finite addition. So in any case, William Lane Craig's view is that there's both philosophical reasons for thinking that the universe cannot be eternal and also scientific reasons for thinking that the universe can't be eternal. So if there can't be an actual infinite or an actual infinity created through successive addition, then the universe must have had a beginning because there can't be an actual infinite number of days past. All things with a beginning have a cause, therefore the universe has a cause, and the name given to the cause of the universe is usually God or the creator. You don't have to call the cause of the universe anything in particular, but most people in English at least call this God. If you were to ask the question, well, what happened before 13.7 billion years ago? And the answer would be, well, there was no before. There was no time at all before all this began. And in a similar way, you say, well, where was the singularity? In what space? If you graphed it, where would it be? And the question would be, well, it wouldn't be anywhere because there was no space either. So the idea, and again, I find it very hard to wrap my mind around this idea, but the idea is that all time, all space, and all matter all arose, you might say, from this singularity, from this Big Bang, or however you want to put it. So there just was no time and no space and no matter before that. Now, that's hard for me to understand. And it makes sense that it's hard for us to understand, right? Because we are in the universe, we're in time, We're in space, we're in matter. Everything we've experienced is bound up with time, space, and matter. So it's makes sense that it would be hard for us to conceptualize. Well, how do we know that what we've discovered is correct? So, for instance, scientists say things like that the distribution of the radiation in the universe points to the universe having a beginning. Well, how do we know that? Well, I guess the way we know it is we have built machines that are able to detect radiation, and we built telescopes that enable us to see distant parts of the galaxy, and we've constructed mathematics that allows us to understand something about the universe. Now, are those things reliable? Like, say, math. When I add things up, 2 plus 2 is 4. Well, how do I know that's right? I guess what I'd say is we have good reason to think that our math is correct, right? In other words, we have good reason to think telescopes work. We have good reason to think that radiation detectors work. And so, could it be wrong? Yeah, I suppose it could be wrong. And it could be that all the scientific discoveries that we've made in the last 100 years are all wrong. Yeah, of course, it's theoretically possible. But the question, I think, isn't, is it theoretically possible, but rather, is it reasonable? So in other words, if we have two beliefs, the universe is eternal and the universe is not eternal, and we have a lot of evidence for one view and say not very much evidence for the other view, it seems like it's reasonable to say, well, this other view that has more evidence is more reasonable to believe than the one that has no evidence for it, say. But is it theoretically possible it's all wrong? Yeah, of course. I mean, theoretically, maybe you're a brain in a vat. Maybe there's no other human beings in the world and we're just all imagining everything. Maybe, okay, maybe, but I think at least that, if you're going to live, you kind of have to live based on what, given the evidence, seems more reasonable to believe. What about this? Maybe the universe caused itself to exist. Maybe all time, all space, and matter just made itself to exist. Now, the trouble with this view is that something cannot come from nothing. So think about, say, this child. So there was obviously a time when this child did not exist. From the picture, it looks like this child's like 2 years old or so. 1,000 years ago, this child did not exist. So she was nothing at that point. Now, could she have caused herself to come into existence? It seems like she couldn't. And the reason would be, if this individual does not exist, then this individual can do nothing. She can't get you coffee, she can't mow the lawn, and if she can't do anything, she can't cause anything. And if she can't cause anything, well, then she can't cause herself to exist. She can't cause anything at all. She can't cause herself to come into existence. So if the universe is really 13.7 billion years old, then say 14 billion years ago, there was no universe. That is to say, there was no time, there was no space, there was no matter. But if that's true, then the universe was nothing. But if the universe was nothing, the universe can cause nothing. And if the universe can cause nothing, the universe can't cause itself. So the universe can't cause itself to come into existence. So we need a cause for the universe. And is the cause of the universe God? Well, maybe yes, maybe no. I suppose it depends on what you mean by God. Some people mean by God a being that is outside of time. And we know that the cause of the universe has to be prior to time. It's the cause of the universe is that which brings about time. So you might say the cause of the universe has to be something timeless, or you might say something eternal. The cause of the universe is something prior to space. It is before all space. So the cause of the universe has to be something that is not in any particular location. Something, in other words, that isn't in a particular space, because it's prior to all space. And the cause of the universe has to be something prior to matter. It has to be something immaterial, in other words. It has to be something, you might say, spiritual, as opposed to merely material. And the cause of the universe clearly has to be something immensely powerful. I mean, think about how much power it took to make an aircraft carrier or a 747, right? It took all kinds of welders and designers and huge manufacturing plants to make a 747. But to make the whole universe, to make all time, all space, all matter, all planets, all suns, everything, well, that takes immense power, unbelievable power. And Craig at least thinks that the cause of the universe has to be something that is not impersonal. So think about an impersonal cause like the sun. The sun is an impersonal cause. In other words, the sun just does and causes whatever it causes automatically, like, sending off heat and sending off light. The sun doesn't wake up in the morning and decide, well, today I'm going to be hot. And, maybe tomorrow the sun wakes up and says, oh, today I'm going to be cold. And the next week, oh, I'll be hot again. No, the sun is an impersonal cause. It just always is doing whatever it's doing, namely heating. But by contrast, the cause of the universe has to be a personal cause. Why? Well, because there was a time when the cause of the universe was not creating the universe, namely 14, 15, 16 billion years ago. And then the cause of the universe intervened and acted about 13.4 billion years ago and brought this about. So what do you call in English a being that is immaterial, a being that is eternal, a being that is immensely powerful, a being that brings about all time, all space, and all matter? Well, the word in English that we use for that individual is God. In other languages, they use different terms. In Arabic, they say Allah. In German, they say Gott. In French, they say Dieu. In Latin, they say Deus. So, different languages have different words for it. But the idea is captured by the English word God. Again, why would we think the cause of the universe is God instead of something else? Well, because the cause of the universe has to be immaterial, because it causes all matter. The cause of the universe has to be eternal, because it causes all time. The cause of the universe has to be something that's immensely powerful to bring about all time, all space, and all matter. And the name that people use generally in English, and you don't have to use this name, you could call this being the creator. You could call this being the one who brought about the universe. It doesn't matter what you call it. But most people in English call the being that corresponds to an eternal, immaterial, personal, immensely powerful cause of the universe. Most people use the term God. I mean by God, nothing specific to any individual religion. In other words, this is not about Islamic God, Jewish God, Christian God, or for that matter, deistic God. So someone like Thomas Jefferson disbelieved in Christianity, but did believe that God was a sort of watchmaker who makes the universe and starts it on its course. So this is not you might say, an interreligious dispute, at least among theistic. This is not, you might say, taking sides in a kind of interreligious dispute. So in other words, Christians, Muslims, and Jews and deists all would accept that the cause of the universe is God, but they also would all disagree about who exactly God is. So for instance, say Christians would say that God is Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Whereas Jewish people and Muslim people say, no, there's no Trinity in God. Or Jews, Christians, and Muslims would all agree that God loves humanity and interacts with human beings. Whereas a deist would say, no, God is like, just starts off the Big Bang or whatever, and really has no further interactions or care or concern for people here and now on planet Earth. So again, I'm not taking any position on that at all. Craig isn't either at this point. It's just the idea that all of them would agree on, say Jews, Christians, Muslims, and deists, would be there has to be, and not just them either, people like Aristotle too would say, there has to be a first cause, you might say. Now again, what exactly that is, does this first cause love us? All that's an important question, but just a different question than the one we're looking at now. If God exists, well, then God would be utterly unlike anything that we encounter in everyday life. And it would make sense since we our heads are normally wrapped around everyday things like, plants and milk and refrigerators and cars and, things that we see and hear and touch, that God would be, really different than that. So in Latin, there's a phrase totaliter aliter. And totaliter aliter means totally other. And, you would expect, if these arguments are right, that God would be totally different and other and unlike, again, everyday things. Okay, well, what caused God? And I think the question, what caused God, could arise if one of the premises in your argument was everything has a cause. Now, was that one of the premises in the argument that was given here? Everything has a cause? So the premise is not everything has a cause or everything has a beginning, because I think you're right. If that were the premise, well, then this argument doesn't work, because you say, well, if everything has a cause, what caused God? Or if everything has a beginning, what began God? But that's not the premise at all. So the question, what caused God or who caused God, is a question that makes a lot of grammatical sense. But I think if you understand what's meant by the term God here, it actually doesn't make reasonable sense. So there's lots of questions that make grammatical sense, but if you understand the terms that make up the question, do not really make logical sense. So for instance, let me give a different question. How long is the color yellow? Is it like 3 feet long? Is it 4 feet long? What would you say? How long is the color yellow? So the color yellow does not have any length. So, okay, how about this? How much does the middle C of a piano weigh? How much does that note weigh? So like 10 pounds? Is it 5 pounds? How much? Yeah, it doesn't weigh anything. So there's lots of questions you can ask that seem on the face of it to be like good questions. But when you understand and dig deeper, you'd say, well, look, the color yellow just doesn't have any length. It doesn't have any weight. And so to say, well, how much does it weigh? How long is it? It's just a nonsense question. So likewise, if God really is, say, eternal, well, then it doesn't make any sense to say, well, when was God made, or who made God? If God is really the uncaused cause, it doesn't make any sense to say, well, what caused God? What you're talking about is something that goes beyond speech and beyond language. So you can't really adequately talk about it or exhaustively talk about it or comprehensively talk about it. It's very different, therefore, than, say, everyday things in our experience. So it's easier to wrap your mind around and you have words to describe things in our everyday experience, like an apple, right? Or a car, right? They're everyday things. And so our everyday language adequately, or at least more adequately, can talk about those things and things that go beyond our everyday experience. And the idea is something like this, that you can't give what you don't have. So in other words, if I'm going to cause some effect, the idea here is that before the universe existed, before time, space, and matter existed, there was no pebble and there was no bigger boulders, and there was therefore no of this pre-existing stuff that gave rise to the whole avalanche. So I think you're right that a little person barely exerting any force at all can just knock over a little pebble, and then it gives rise to more and more effects downstream. But that's because the little pebble has the power to knock over the next pebbles, and the next pebbles have the power to knock over the following pebbles, and bigger rocks and so on and so forth. But all those things presuppose that there are the pebbles to start with, right? So if it's true that the universe began to exist, then what that means is there's no pebbles, there's no big boulders, there's no cliff, all that didn't exist at all. And so it had to be something that was able to give. In other words, you can't give what you don't have, right? So something had to have the power to give existence to all time, all space, and all matter. And is that being immensely powerful or all powerful? Well, we don't know for sure, but minimally it's immensely powerful to bring about all that. Now, is it all powerful? That's a different question. And I think you're right that this argument doesn't show that an all powerful being exists. It just has to be immensely powerful. So isn't it true that it's sometimes, at least, more than one individual causes something else? Like, for instance, you and me. I wasn't caused just by my mother. I wasn't caused just by my father. I was caused by 2 individuals. And actually, Thomas Aquinas thinks I was caused by 3. His view is that we're caused by our mother, our father, and also by God. In any case, everybody agrees at least two were involved. No one's solely the creation of their mother or solely the creation of their father. So maybe the cause of the universe is multiple. Maybe it's two, maybe it's three, maybe it's 37, maybe it's 5,000. Who knows? No one needs to call this God. I mean, you could just say the cause of the universe is timeless, immaterial, personal, powerful, and in no particular location or something. You could say that. So there's no necessity to use the word God. It's just in English. If you said in English, you said, look, hey, I'm looking for the English word for the creator of the universe who's eternal, who's timeless, who's spaceless, who's immaterial. What's the word in English you use for that? Right? In your English, if you were in an English as second language class, the teacher would say, oh, well, we have a word for that. It's called God, or it's called the creator. And that's the word we use. Now, whether or not that individual exists is a different question. We have the word leprechaun, we have the word unicorn, we have the word tooth fairy, but that doesn't mean that there actually exists a tooth fairy. So I'm not begging any questions here, but the word that we use in English for that kind of being is God. And if this argument is right, well, then the cause of the universe does exist. There is such a being as what the English people in English would call God. An impersonal cause is always kind of doing its thing. It's always bringing about its effect. And the example would be like the sun. So like the sun is an impersonal cause. In other words, it doesn't decide, it doesn't change from, I'm going to, send off heat. It's like just always sending off heat. It doesn't decide, well, I'm going to do cold today. I'm going to do medium. It's like, doing impersonally and automatically what it does. Or if we think about, say, H2O, water. Water doesn't decide, well, today I'm just not going to freeze at 32 degrees. I'm just going to just turn into steam at 32 degrees. If it's 32 degrees, it just does freeze. By contrast to a personal cause like you or me, we can change. So today I can be nice to my wife. Tomorrow I could be a total jerk. And the next day I could be nice again. So I'm not like the sun that's just always hot, always hot, always hot, always hot. I can be nice, I can be nasty, I can be something in between. I'm a personal cause, so I can change what I'm doing. So why does Craig think that the cause of the universe has to be personal? That is to say, not automatically and always doing what it's doing. Well, the reason he thinks that is that the universe is 13.7 billion years old. So in other words, it wasn't as if the cause of the universe was always eternally creating the universe, which could have been, right? It could have just always been making the universe, but apparently it wasn't, because the universe is only 13.7 billion years old. So the cause of the universe, he thinks, can't be just impersonal, like the sun, always doing what it's doing. It has to be what he calls a personal cause that isn't always doing what it's doing. So that's sort of the distinction he's making. Unlike an automatic process, like the sun just being hot or water freezing at 32 degrees, that it's not automatic. It's not just always doing what it's doing. Chooses, or there's some autonomy, or there's some freedom to not do, because apparently, at least if the scientific evidence is right, the universe, was not eternal. It's not always being made. It started to be made 13.7 billion years ago. So that's sort of the idea that he's driving at. And that moves it closer to what a deist or a Jew or a Muslim or a Christian would think of God, as not just a kind of force automatically doing whatever it's doing. Well, let me raise a difficulty then. Science is not always consistent. It seems sometimes that science seems to change, right? I mean, there's all kinds of cases where new discoveries are made, and we used to think this, but now we think that. So here's one objection to William Lane Craig's argument might be, look, a part of your argument is based on contemporary science. And contemporary science, what if it's wrong? I don't know what science is going to come up with. Couldn't it be the case that tomorrow, maybe the New York Times is going to run a big headline, universe is actually eternal. Big Bang never happened. And maybe the radiation readings are all off, and we've misapplied the second law of thermodynamics. Who knows? So what if contemporary science is wrong? And what if the universe is actually eternal? Maybe it is. I'm not a scientist. I don't know everything. It's possible. Well, what we're going to do is next time, in next class, we're going to look at arguments that Thomas Aquinas gives for the existence of a first cause, for the existence of an unmoved mover, for the existence of a necessary being. And Aquinas thinks, and maybe he's wrong, but he thinks that even if it were true that the universe is eternal, there still would have to be a first cause. There still would have to be an unmoved mover. And so next time what we'll do is we'll look at the arguments of Aquinas about even if the universe were eternal, he thinks that we could still know that there is a first cause, that there is an unmoved mover. If the universe is eternal, could we still justify belief in God? Well, Aquinas' view is yes, we could. Anyway, maybe he's right, maybe he's wrong. Next time we will look at that, and next time we'll talk about Aquinas' very famous 5 ways to argue for God's existence.